Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show that takes a stack of information and extracts the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
That's what we aim for.
Today, we're plunging into a concept that might sound a bit abstract, but it's really foundational to how we perceive, how we move, even how we heal. It's the idea of resonance.
Right, and we're not just talking about sound waves in music here.
No, not just plucking a guitar string.
Exactly. We're talking about how systems, from our very cells up to our brains, literally vibrate or tune together. How they couple with information and energy from the environment.
So it's a biological tuning.
In a sense, yes. For this deep dive, we're drawing from some really fascinating sources. We've got the pioneering work of James Gibson on ecological perception, which kind of sets the stage.
Okay.
Then there are contemporary theories on brain dynamics, people like Stephen Grossberg, and we'll even get into insights about the bioelectrical nature of life itself from researchers like Becker and Tennant.
Sounds like a broad range. What's the mission then?
Our mission is really to unpack this ecological dynamics understanding of resonance. What does it actually mean for a biological system to resonate?
Beyond the simple metaphors.
Precisely. Then we'll explore the mechanisms. How does this resonance actually help coordinate and control our actions? Moving our bodies.
From walking to complex sports skills.
Exactly that. And finally, we'll see how this whole concept can really inform our understanding of athletic performance and development. It fundamentally comes down to how we detect the right information to correctly control our behavior in any given task.
Okay, let's unpack this then. This term, ecological dynamics, it might sound a bit like physics class homework for some. What exactly is this perspective, and how does it shift our understanding of something like resonance from, just a musical term to a biological principle? Well, where do we start?
What's truly fascinating, and maybe a bit counterintuitive at first, is how this ecological perspective flips our traditional understanding of perception on its head. For a long time, the standard view was that perception is based on sensations. Passive receptors in your eyes, ears, skin just sort of soaking up energy like little detectors. Light hits the retina, sound waves hit the eardrum.
Right, the sort of building blocks model. Sensations first, then the brain figures it out.
Exactly. But James Gibson's ecological approach, which is really a cornerstone of ecological dynamics, argues against that. He says perception isn't primarily about raw sensations. It's about actively detecting information.
Actively detecting information. Okay, what's the difference?
Think about it like this. When you look at, say, a chair across the room, as you move your head slightly or your eyes make tiny movements, the actual pattern of light hitting your retinas, the raw sensation, is constantly changing.
Sure, the image flickers and shifts.
But you don't perceive a flickering, shifting chair.
Yeah.
You perceive a stable, constant chair.
Right. I just see the chair.
Gibson says this happens because our sense organs aren't just passive receivers. He calls them active perceptual systems. They're actively searching out what he called invariants.
Invariants.
Unchanging patterns of information in the environment. Patterns that remain constant despite the flux of changing sensations. Your perceptual system tunes into the stable structure, the relationship between surfaces, the layout, not the fluctuating raw data.
So it's filtering out the noise to find the signal, the meaning.
That's a great way to put it. It's detecting the meaningful structure that specifies the environment and what it affords for action. It's a direct pickup of information, not an indirect construction based on ambiguous sensations.
And Gibson also emphasized the environment itself, didn't he?
Absolutely. He stressed that the environment isn't just a blank stage. It's richly structured at all levels of size, from huge mountains down to tiny crystals. This layout of surfaces relative to the air is what profoundly determines, and you could say invites, animal behavior. It tells us what we can do.
Like a surface affording walking or an object affording grasping?
Precisely. That concept of affordances is key to Gibson. So perception is about detecting these affordances, this action-relevant information, directly from the structured environment.
Okay, that makes sense. Perception as active information detection. So if that's the foundation, where does this idea of resonance fit in? What's the link between perceiving stable information and the idea of biological systems resonating?
Right, that's the next logical step. The physical idea of resonance is pretty straightforward, like you mentioned the guitar string.
Yeah, the string vibrates, the body vibrates with it, makes the sound louder or richer.
Exactly. The driving system, the string, affects the driven system, the guitar body, causing it to oscillate sympathetically at specific frequencies. Now, Raja takes this physical metaphor and applies it to ecological dynamics. He proposes that resonance is the fundamental process that couples the dynamics of an organism's behavior with the information available in the environment.
So it's the glue connecting our actions to the world's information.
You can think of it that way. It suggests our perceptual systems actively resonate to main aspects of perceptual information. It's not just passively receiving signals, it's actively tuning in like you tune a radio to a specific station.
Tuning into specific patterns or frequencies in the environment.
Exactly. Tuning into these informational variables. This allows for a flexible relationship with the environment. Our system can smoothly shift its tuning from one critical piece of information to another, which is vital for learning new skills or adapting during performance.
So how does this tuning happen biologically? Is it happening in our nerves, our brains?
That's the crucial question, and the answer seems to be yes, at multiple levels. Neural systems, for instance, are seen as really strong candidates for being resonant systems. Why? Because their intrinsic dynamics, their internal activity, are complex combinations of different oscillators, different rhythmic patterns.
Okay.
This combination of different internal rhythms leads to what's called metastability.
Metastability? Sounds complex.
It just means the system is in a dynamic balance.
Yeah.
It has tendencies towards both integration, different parts working together smoothly, and segregation parts maintaining their own independent functions. Think of a flock of birds. They move as one integrated unit, but each bird is still an independent entity.
So it's stable, but flexible, not rigidly locked.
Precisely. This metastability allows the brain, or any complex system, to be incredibly adaptable. It's poised to quickly shift and reorganize, coupling flexibly to different environmental variables or task demands without getting stuck in one mode.
And does this start right at the senses?
It seems so. Even our sensory receptors, the very first point of contact with light, sound, pressure, are described as having an intrinsically oscillatory nature.
So they're not just passive switches, they have their own rhythm.
Yes, the idea. This inherent rhythm allows them to do something remarkable. Transform non-oscillatory information from the environment, like steady light reflecting off an object, into oscillatory information, a rhythmic pattern that our neural systems can then resonate with.
Wow. So the tuning starts right at the input.
It suggests the entire system, from periphery to cortex, is geared towards this dynamic, resonant coupling with environmental information.
This is getting really interesting. If our whole perceptual system involves detecting information and resonating, what's actually going on inside our brains? Are there specific resonances happening that create our conscious experience, what we actually see or feel?
Absolutely. This is where Stephen Grossberg's work, specifically his adaptive resonance theory, or ART-T, becomes incredibly relevant. He describes how the brain generates what he calls adaptive resonances.
Adaptive resonances.
Yes, and these are the neural processes that, he argues, actually support our conscious experiences, what we consciously see, hear, feel, and know. They're not just background noise, they're the very basis of awareness.
So not all brain activity is conscious, only the resonant activity.
According to ART, yes. These brain resonances are crucial because they mark perceptual and cognitive representations that are complete, context-sensitive, and stable enough to control effective actions.
Complete, context-sensitive, stable. Okay, so they have to reach a certain quality threshold.
Exactly. Think of it like achieving a stable, coherent pattern of activation across different brain areas involved in processing something. When that stable resonance locks in, that's when the conscious percept emerges. Without it, you might have fleeting activity, but no stable awareness to guide effective behavior. It's the brain basically signaling, okay, this pattern is meaningful and reliable.
Does Grossberg identify different kinds of these resonances?
He does. He distinguishes between different types based on the brain areas involved and their function. For instance, he talks about surface shroud resonances.
Surface shroud.
These are thought to be critical for conscious seeing and guiding immediate actions. They involve feedback loops between visual cortex areas processing surface features like color and brightness, and areas involved in spatial attention and eye movements.
So they help us focus on something and see it clearly.
Yes, they help maintain sustained spatial attention on an object, like keeping your eye on the ball. And they also support the rapid eye movements, the saccades we make to explore important features of that object.
And there are other types.
Yes. He also talks about feature category resonances. These are more involved in learning, recognition, and predicting object categories, independent of the specific view.
Like recognizing your dog from any angle.
Exactly. These resonances help build stable, view-invariant representations of objects, so you don't have to store every single possible view you've ever seen. This is fundamental for making sense of the world and classifying things efficiently. These categories then help guide our attention towards things we expect to see.
So the brain is constantly setting up these different kinds of resonances to perceive and interact.
That's the core idea of RT. It's a dynamic process of matching bottom-up sensory information with top-down expectations and learned categories, leading to stable, conscious recognition and action.
Now, you mentioned earlier potentially even planetary resonance. That sounds pretty wild.
It does, but it's based on some fascinating work, particularly by Dr. Robert Becker. He looked into the Earth's own electromagnetic field way back in the Precambrian era.
Billions of years ago.
Right. His work suggests that the Earth's pulsing magnetic field interacting with the ionosphere effectively created a huge electromagnetic resonator cavity.
A whole planet.
Pulsing at a specific frequency around 10 hertz. This is related to what's now known as the Schumann resonances.
Okay, so the Earth had a heartbeat.
In an electromagnetic sense, yes. And Becker's really mind-blowing suggestion is that all life forms that evolved within this 10 hertz field and their descendants, which includes us, would naturally resonate at this frequency or show extreme sensitivity to it.
Even after the original conditions changed.
That's the hypothesis. It suggests a kind of deep biological entrainment. And intriguingly, this 10 hertz band remains, as Becker put it, supremely important for most life forms.
Why?
Because it's the primary frequency range of the alpha waves in the EEG, the electroencephalogram, brain waves in essentially all animals.
So our brain's baseline rhythm matches this ancient planetary pulse.
It's a very strong correlation, suggesting a fundamental pervasive resonance connecting us to our planet's electromagnetic environment. It implies our biology might be tuned at a very deep level to these natural frequencies.
That's incredible to think about. Okay, so if our brains or bodies are constantly resonating with information, with environmental frequencies, maybe even planetary ones, how does this actually translate into coordinating our actions, moving from just perceiving to doing? How do these resonances help us walk, run, play sports effectively? What are the mechanisms?
Right, this is where the theory meets the pavement, so to speak. How does resonance actually work to control movement? One absolute crucial mechanism is proprioception.
Our sense of body position, muscle sense.
That's the common definition, but Gibson, again, broadened it. He argued it's not a special, separate sense. It's an overall function common to all systems. It's our inherent self-sensitivity, detecting information about the state of our own body, where our limbs are, how they're moving, the forces acting on them.
So it's information detection, but about ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just one feedback loop. Think of it as multiple concurrent loops operating simultaneously. Some loops stay entirely within the body, feedback from muscles and joints. Others extend outside the body.
Right.
His example was speech. Controlling the precise movements of your lips and tongue isn't just based on feedback from the lips and tongue. It's also critically controlled by hearing your own voice.
Ah, the auditor feedback.
Right. If you introduce a slight delay in that auditory feedback, even though your mouth muscles are working fine, your speech patterns get completely disrupted. It shows how these different loops, internal and external, have to work together and they have to cover.
Meaning they change together in a consistent way.
Precisely. Coordination relies fundamentally on this co-variation of inputs from our different perceptual systems. Think about learning to balance. You have input from your vestibular system in your inner ear telling you about gravity and acceleration.
Okay.
You have haptic input, that's touch, pressure from the ground on your feet, information from your joints and muscles about limb position and forces.
Right.
And you have visual input, seeing the horizon, the flow of the visual world around you. When you're successfully balancing or moving, the information from all these systems is consistently linked. It tells the same story about your body's relationship to the environment.
So when a child learns to walk, for example.
Exactly. As they roll, crawl, stand, and walk, the constant pull of gravity, the push of the ground under their feet, the stable visual difference between the sky and the earth, all these environmental factors are correlated.
And their internal senses match that.
And their vestibular, haptic, and visual inputs are likewise correlated over time. This creates an incredibly rich, redundant, and reliable source of information, directly specifying their body's orientation and movement relative to the environment. It's this tightly coupled covariation that allows for smooth, adaptive control.
So proprioception is really about resonating with this complex web of self-generated and environmental information.
That's a very good way to put it. Now, if we scale this up to controlling complex movements involving many muscles and joints, the concept of synergies becomes absolutely key. This comes a lot from the work of people like Turvey.
Synergies, like muscles working together.
Exactly. But it's more than just muscles contracting simultaneously. A synergy is a coherent organization of many components, muscles, joints, degrees of freedom that are temporarily constrained to act as a single functional unit.
Why is that helpful?
It massively simplifies the control problem. Imagine trying to consciously control every single one of the hundreds of muscles involved in throwing a ball. It's impossible.
Right, the degrees of freedom problem.
Exactly. Synergies reduce those degrees of freedom. The brain, or the nervous system, doesn't control individual muscles. It activates or modulates these pre-organized functional groupings, these synergies. It makes complex actions manageable.
Are these synergies fixed patterns, like hardwired programs?
No, and that's crucial. They exist in that metastassible state we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They have inherent stability, a tendency to work together, integration, but also the flexibility to break apart or adapt, segregation.
Ah, that balance again.
Yes. This metastability is why the same muscles and joints can be rapidly reorganized to perform completely different functions depending on the task context. Think about your hammer. You can use it to grip a hammer powerfully or play a delicate melody on a piano or sign your name. Same hardware, different functional organization.
That makes sense. Are there models for how this works?
There are. A classic example is the Hawken-Kelso Buns, or HKB, model. It mathematically describes how two oscillating systems, like your two hands moving rhythmically, tend to spontaneously settle into stable patterns.
Like clapping in time.
Like moving your fingers together in phase or alternating anti-phase. The model shows how these stable states emerge, but also how the system can transition between them, or even exist in states of relative coordination, where the coupling is looser, more flexible.
So even when movements aren't perfectly synchronized, there are still underlying tendencies.
Exactly. Ghosts of these stable attractor states still influence the dynamics, creating both tendencies to coordinate and tendencies to separate, allowing for that fluid adaptability we see in skilled action.
Can you give a concrete example of this resonance in action?
The hula hoop example is a good one. To keep that hoop going, your hips and torso have to oscillate in a specific way, right?
Definitely a rhythm to it.
Research shows that the lower limbs and trunk spontaneously organize into basically two main coordination modes, one for horizontal movement, one for vertical. And these modes operate very close to being in phase with each other, effectively tuning the body's oscillations to the resonant frequency for the task, the frequency needed to keep the hoop up.
So the body finds the optimal rhythm, the resonant frequency, automatically.
It self-organizes into that state. It's not consciously calculated. It emerges from the dynamic interaction between the body, the hoop, and gravity.
Fascinating. You also mentioned geometric constraints.
Yes, this adds another layer, especially for limb movements in 3D space. The physics of 3D rotations, the fact that the order in which you rotate something matters, they're non-commutative, imposes really strong geometric constraints on how our limbs have to move to achieve a specific goal, like precisely positioning your hand to grasp an object.
So the synergies have to respect these geometric rules.
They absolutely have to. To orient your hand correctly in space requires a highly specific, coordinated sequence of rotations at the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. The synergies manage this incredibly complex spatial choreography, respecting the underlying geometry of movement.
Wow. Okay, so we have proprioception, synergies, metastability, geometry. That paints a picture of sophisticated mechanical coordination. But you also mentioned electrical systems. How does the body's electrical nature tie into resonance and control?
This is a really exciting and perhaps less mainstream area, but potentially profoundly important. Turvey himself points towards the mechanical structure first, drawing on Ingber's work on tensegrity.
Tensegrity, tension and integrity.
Exactly. It's an architectural principle where structures maintain their integrity through a balance of continuous tension elements, think cables or membranes, and discontinuous compression elements like struts or bones. A geodesic dome is a classic example.
Okay, how does that apply to us?
The idea is that the cell's internal skeleton, the cytoskeleton, and by extension, our whole body's network of muscles, bones, and especially fascia, the connective tissue web function as tensegrity structures.
Our bodies are built like geodesic domes.
At a fundamental level, yes. The implication is that when a source hits this system, say pressure on your foot, the stress isn't just localized. It propagates rapidly throughout the whole interconnected structure, the fascial network.
Like vibrations through a spider web.
Exactly. This provides a super fast, mechanically based way to regulate and coordinate the whole system, both globally and locally, almost instantaneously. It's faster than sending nerve signals. The fascia acts like a mechanical communication network.
Okay, so that's the mechanical side. What about the purely electrical?
This brings us to the work of Dr. Jerry Tennant and his concept of healing as voltage. It's a bold statement, but his core idea is that our cells are fundamentally electrical devices.
Like tiny batteries.
Precisely. He argues they're designed to run at a specific negative voltage, typically around -20 to -25 millivolts. This negative charge indicates an electron donor status. The cell has enough electrons to power its functions.
And this voltage matters.
Critically. According to Tennant, this voltage level directly impacts almost everything the cell does. For instance, it controls oxygen levels. Higher voltage allows more oxygen to dissolve into the cell water. Lower voltage means less oxygen.
And less oxygen means less energy.
Dramatically less. Cells switch from efficient aerobic respiration, making lots of ATP, the energy currency, to very inefficient anaerobic fermentation, making hardly any ATP. This leads directly to cellular dysfunction and fatigue. And crucially, he states that healing requires even higher voltage, around -50 millivolts, to fuel the demanding process of repair.
How does the cell manage this voltage?
He points to the cell membrane and the proteins just underneath it, the cytoskeleton, forming an RC circuit, a resistor-capacitor circuit. This acts like a tunable circuit that can store charge, like a capacitor, and manage electron flow, like a resistor, allowing the cell to electrically interact or resonate with its environment and other cells.
And how does this voltage get around the body? Nerves.
Nerves play a role, but Tennant emphasizes two other wiring systems. First, the perineural system, the sheaths around the nerves, which are known to have semiconductor properties. And second, what he identifies as the acupuncture meridian system, which he argues corresponds physically to the fascial planes of the body.
So fascia isn't just mechanical, it's electrical too.
He proposes it acts as a network of electronic semiconductors, offering pathways of least resistance for electron flow throughout the body. This allows for rapid, systemic electrical communication and energy transfer.
Does this electrical view connect to healing and regeneration?
Very directly. There's established research, which Becker also highlighted, showing that specific electrical signals like small direct currents, shifting polarity, can induce cells to dedifferentiate, becoming like stem cells again, and form a blastema, the structure from which regeneration occurs in animals like salamanders. This implies direct electrical control over growth and repair processes.
And frequency matters here too, like the 10 hertz resonance.
Absolutely. Tennant emphasizes frequency matching. For electrons, or energy, to be effectively transferred to a cell or used by it, the frequency needs to match the cell's own resonant frequency. He gives the example of the human brain typically operating in the 70-78 megahertz range. It suggests that therapies or interventions need to be tuned to the specific frequencies of the target tissues to be effective.
So our whole body is this complex interplay of mechanical and electrical resonance, from cells to systems.
That's the picture emerging.
And bringing it back to the brain one more time, how does its internal resonance specifically help control actions, especially skilled actions?
Grossberg's work again provides insights here. He shows how conscious attention, seeing, and knowing, products of those adaptive resonances, actively regulate specific action sequences. The brain uses intricate feedback loops between different cortical areas to coordinate spatial attention, where things are, and object attention, what things are.
The what and where streams.
Exactly. Those two complementary processing streams, the what stream mainly in the temporal lobe for recognizing objects regardless of view, and the where stream in the parietal lobe for locating things and guiding actions towards them, interact constantly.
So you recognize the cup and reach for its location where?
Precisely. This interaction allows us to consciously identify objects and then direct appropriate goal-oriented actions towards them with speed and accuracy. The surface shroud resonances we mentioned earlier are key here.
Remind me what they do.
They help sustain spatial attention on the target object, keeping it stable in your perception, while also supporting the rapid eye movements needed to gather detailed information from its features. This entire resonant process directly fuels the learning of those invariant object categories we talked about. The brain continuously refines its understanding of the world through these resonant interactions.
Okay, this has been a huge journey through the theory. Let's pivot to the practical. What does all this mean for us? Especially, say, for someone interested in peak athletic performance or skill development or even just better recovery and health. How can this concept of resonance inform how we approach those things?
This is where it gets really powerful, I think, because it shifts our perspective on what skill and performance actually are. From the ecological dynamics viewpoint, skill acquisition, especially in sports, isn't about memorizing movements or building rigid motor programs in the brain.
What is it then?
It's an education of attention, as Gibson called it. It's learning to detect the right perceptual information, the critical invariants, the affordances in any given situation.
So it's about perception, not just movement execution.
Primarily about perception guiding action. It means actively learning to look for the critical features, maybe listen for the distinctive variations in sound or finger the textures, whatever information is key for that specific task.
Can you give an example?
Think of an elite skier navigating a slalom course. They aren't thinking about individual muscle commands for turning. They've learned to attend to incredibly subtle variables in the informational space.
Really?
The changing texture of the snow, which specifies grip, the precise angle of the slope ahead, the rhythm and spacing of the gates, maybe even the subtle shifts in wind pressure. They learn to resonate with that specific dynamic information.
And that allows for better control.
It allows for more economical, efficient, and anticipatory control. Their perception becomes faster, more direct. They pick up the necessary information earlier and more accurately, allowing for smoother, faster, and more adaptive actions. It's about tuning the perceptual system to the task-relevant environmental dynamics.
Okay, so skill is tuning attention. What about coordination and adaptability, those synergies we talked about?
Understanding synergies and metastability directly explained how athletes achieve those fluid, seemingly effortless movements despite the complexity of their bodies. They aren't consciously micromanaging. Their system self-organizes into these efficient functional units.
And the metastability helps them adapt.
Absolutely. That inherent flexibility, the balance between integration and segregation, is what allows for those rapid remote adjustments to unexpected things, a bump, a slip, a sudden change in the game. The system can quickly reorganize while maintaining overall stability and goal direction. This is crucial in dynamic sports environments.
And those geometric constraints.
They highlight the incredible precision required. Think about a pitcher throwing a baseball accurately at high speed, or a gymnast executing a complex routine. The specific sequence of 3D joint rotations is critical. The underlying synergistic organization has mastered these complex geometric and dynamic challenges, finding resonant solutions for power and accuracy.
Is there an example of what happens when this system breaks down?
Yes, the studies of patients with severe peripheral neuropathy are quite striking. These individuals lose proprioceptive feedback, that haptic sense of body position and movement below the neck.
They can't feel where their limbs are without looking.
Exactly. They become entirely reliant on vision to guide even simple movements.
Yeah.
It requires immense conscious effort. Even a brief moment of inattention, like looking away or sneezing, can lead to a complete loss of balance or control.
Wow.
It powerfully underscores how vital that continuous, resonant coupling with rich haptic information is for our natural, fluid, seemingly effortless coordination. When that resonance is broken, movement becomes incredibly difficult and fragile.
Okay, so attention, synergies, adaptability. Now let's loop back to the bioelectrical side. That seemed really fundamental. How could understanding cellular voltage and frequency impact an athlete? Sounds like a potential game changer.
It really could be. If Tenet's framework is correct, then an athlete's ability to perform and recover is fundamentally tied to their cellular energy status, their voltage.
Maintaining that -20 to -25 millivolts.
Yes, for optimal function. Remember, that voltage dictates oxygen availability within the cells. High voltage, plenty of oxygen, efficient ATP energy production. Low voltage, low oxygen, a massive drop in energy production, leading to fatigue and poor function.
And healing needs even more voltage.
Around -50 millivolts, yes. So for an athlete constantly breaking down tissues through training and needing rapid repair and recovery, maintaining sufficient cellular voltage seems absolutely paramount. Without it, they simply won't have the energy currency to rebuild and adapt effectively.
How does diet play into this? You mentioned trans fats.
That's a key point in Tenet's work. He argues that consuming trans fats, or plastic fats, makes cell membranes dysfunctional. They literally become like plastic, unable to hold a charge properly.
So they can't act like batteries anymore.
Essentially, yes. This leads to widespread cellular malfunction, chronic fatigue, inflammation, all disastrous for an athlete. Conversely, ensuring adequate intake of good fats, organic ionic minerals, which carry charge, and essential vitamins supports healthy cell membranes, proper voltage, hormone production, things like nitric oxide for blood flow. The whole biochemical machinery depends on this electrical foundation.
And that idea about fungi being activated by low voltage, that sounds alarming for athletes.
It's a concerning implication. If low cellular voltage signals these naturally present fungi to switch into a decomposition mode, releasing enzymes that break down tissues, it could manifest as chronic inflammation, muscle soreness, or symptoms often mistaken for autoimmune issues. This would obviously devastate performance and recovery.
So practically, what's the suggestion? Measuring voltage, using devices.
Tenet advocates for approaches that directly address cellular voltage. This includes diet, avoiding toxins, ensuring proper thyroid function, which sets overall voltage, and potentially using specific biomodulation devices, like his biomodulator, designed to transfer electrons in specific frequencies to tissues to help restore optimal voltage and support healing. It's about addressing the underlying energetic state, not just masking symptoms.
Fascinating potential there. Finally, how does the brain's role in learning tie into athletic development using this resonance idea?
The brain's resonant mechanisms are central to motor learning and control. Grossberg talks about the brain learning and storing motor equivalent movement sequences.
Motor equivalent, meaning?
Meaning flexible plans to achieve a goal, not rigid muscle commands. You can write your name large on a blackboard or small on paper, completely different muscles involved, but the underlying plan or representation is the same. The brain stores these abstract, goal-directed plans as cognitive working memories.
So athletes develop these sophisticated plans.
Yes, allowing them to execute skilled movements efficiently and adaptably across different situations. Think of a skilled basketball player's repertoire of shots. They have flexible cognitive plans they can deploy and modify on the fly.
And how do they choose the best plan?
That's where reinforcement learning comes in, driven by cognitive emotional interactions. The brain evaluates the outcomes of actions. Did that pass work? Did we score? Using feedback loops involving reward signals. This helps select and refine the most effective plans to achieve desired goals in a constantly changing environment.
Like the quarterback reading the defense and picking the best play based on past success and current goals.
Exactly that. It's a constant process of resonant pattern matching, prediction, action, evaluation, and learning, all aimed at optimizing goal achievement in a dynamic world.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've taken this deep dive into resonance, moving way beyond just sound, seeing it as this fundamental principle of how we perceive, move, and even maintain our health at a cellular level. It really paints a picture of us not as passive machines, but as active, self-organizing systems, constantly tuning in, vibrating with, resonating with the information and energy flowing through our environment.
Exactly. What's really striking is that this isn't just a loose metaphor. We've seen mechanisms proposed at multiple levels, the way perception detects information, the way synergies coordinate muscles, the way brain regions synchronize, even the bioelectrical functioning of our cells. It suggests resonance is a core operating principle for biological systems.
Understanding this really highlights the deep interconnectedness of it all, doesn't it? Our physical state, our energy levels, our attention, our cognitive strategies. They're all part of this resonant system.
They absolutely are. Optimal performance, robust health, skilled action. They seem to emerge from a harmonious tuning of all these different aspects, dynamically coupled to the demands and opportunities of the environment.
Which leads to a final thought, a question perhaps for you listening. How might a deeper, more intentional understanding of your own body's resonant states shift things for you?
Yeah, thinking about everything from your cellular voltage. Are you giving your cells the energy they need? To your nutrition, to how you train your attention, not just your muscles.
To how your brain learns new patterns. How could really listening to these internal and external resonances change your approach to your training, your healing, or even just how you navigate your day-to-day world?
Maybe take a moment next time you're moving or even just sitting still to notice those subtle cues from the environment and your own internal responses. How could you perhaps consciously try to tune in better? It's something to consider.